marshlands of northern Europe hold the key that could unlock the door to some of the world's most chilling murder mysteries. Here, many centuries ago, dreadful and violent events took place. Events that brought about the deaths of scores of people. People whose mummified remains have survived to tell their stories today. But can we ever find out what really happened to these people? And why? Will we ever uncover the mysteries of the bog bodies? These deformed and macabre faces belong to people most of who lived and died around 2,000 years ago. Most were killed deliberately, many as human sacrifices, others as victims of murder, punishment, or of witchcraft. As science progresses, we are learning more about who these people were and how and why they died. What's for sure is that for many of the bog people, death must have been frightening and painful, and their final resting place a lonely one. The most common areas where bog bodies have been found are in continental Europe and Scandinavia, Britain and Ireland. The only other place in the world where they've been found is Windover Pond in Florida, this time an ancient cemetery where the 7,000-year-old bog brains of Native Americans have been uncovered. Bog bodies are mummies made by nature in conditions particular to bog waters. Beneath its spongy surface, a bog is made of 90% water. The water is filled with decaying plant matter, peat. The lack of oxygen and chemical properties of bogs prevents the growth of bacteria, which would normally break down the soft tissue and decay a body. Also, the acids and aldehydes in the bog water tan the skin in the same way cowhide is tanned to make leather. The flat, low-lying landscape of Holland, drained by a series of canals, makes it an ideal environment for bog bodies, many of which are now displayed in museums, such as the Drents Museum in the north of the country. The story of one of Holland's most famous bog bodies began in the spring of 1897. Two peat diggers were hard at work digging out the winter fuel from the fens in a small bog near the hamlet of Iddy. One of the men came across this frightening sight. Hideous face of the Iddy girl. Her mouth contorted as if in a last scream, her head twisted to one side, her skin dark and shriveled. But it was her red hair that really spooked the men. They thought they had unearthed a demon and fled. The Iddy Girl was on display in Germany at the Landers Museum in Hanover with a collection of other amazing bog bodies as part of a 5-year world tour, which takes in Holland, Canada, and the United States. Hanover in northern Germany is a grand and elegant city, proudly displaying its fine, rich, and varied architecture to residents and visitors alike. No trip to Hanover would be complete without a visit to the Landers Museum, the temporary home for numerous bog bodies. British archaeologist and bog body expert Professor Miranda Green has come to Hanover to take a look at the Iddy Girl for the first time. She's been studying her and the circumstances of her death for many years. This is quite a moment for Miranda.
Wow, it's incredible to see her face to face for the first time. She's so small and yet so incredibly lifelike.
Half of the Iddy Girl's hair had been shaved, She had been strangled by a 7-foot-long band which had been wound around her neck 3 times and tied with a slipknot, tightened until her life was squeezed out of her.
It's an amazing thought to think that she was killed, strangled. The rope is still there around her neck, which makes it very evocative. You can tell that she died violently. And when we think that she was only 16 years old, it really does give one to think.
She was strangled, and then her body was laid in the marsh. But this was no murder or punishment. This was a case of human sacrifice, a gift to the gods in the times of great crisis. The reason that this 16-year-old girl was chosen above all others to go to the gods may have been because she was no ordinary girl. She suffered an obvious disability. X-rays showed that she had scoliosis, or curvature of the spine, and she was no more than 4.5 feet tall. Her right foot was swollen, indicating that she placed most of her weight on that side.
She would have been very visible in the landscape, walking with a peculiar lurching gait, and that would have marked her out as being peculiar, perhaps even touched by the gods. We mustn't think of these people as perhaps being, pariahs or parasites on society. They may have been regarded as blessed by the gods because they were special, they were different.
And so, being different, special, singled out the itty girl for this awful but necessary event. The event was inevitably horrific, but she may have been given something to help her cope with her natural fear of death.
We know from literary sources that some of these people were maybe drugged or intoxicated with liquor before they died. So the whole thing, she may have gone to her death in a kind of, almost on a high, as it were.
Despite her possible drugged state, death must have been terrifying once strangulation began. Yes, she was chosen because she was special, and yes, an honored messenger to the gods, but the fear must have been enormous.
We're dealing with a very theatrical type of killing. The whole community would be involved, perhaps gathering around watching her die.
This theater of horror would not have been a frequent occurrence. It was a drastic measure only taken in times when the community was threatened, say, by famine, war, or disease.
This would be something which maybe only took place once in 30 or 40 years. So it would have been special, it would have been horrifying, but also cathartic. The whole village might have felt purified and cleansed by this one act.
To see the remains of the young woman who went through such a frightening death may be a little repulsive for most of us, but for the archaeologist, it's a thrill.
What's interesting about her is that this is as close to getting face to face with one's past as one's going to get. Actually looking at this girl just gives one such a buzz.
Looking at the Tollen man of Denmark face to face is enough to give anyone a buzz, considering the remarkable preservation over 2,000 years or more. The peat has mummified his face so perfectly, you can even see the tiny wrinkles around his eyes and the reddish stubble on his chin. You could almost imagine the man waking up and speaking to you.
The tall man's face is very expressive. His survivors has arranged him exactly like a sleeping person. They also bent his arm and his legs exactly like a sleeping child when they put him out in the bog. If he was a man they have executed because of some kind of criminality, I think that they would just have thrown him out. And that demonstrates for me that he was a sacrifice.
In Iron Age times, these strange marshes were chosen as places of sacrifice because of their strange quality, neither solid ground nor water. So the Iron Age peoples thought bogs held a particular religious significance as the entrance to the world of the gods, the other world, the perfect place to offer their most precious gift, a human life. The Tollen man was once such a gift, and is still considered a gift to the Danes. He was found in a bog in Jutland, Denmark's main island. It's a place of wild marshlands, watery fjords and inlets, and well-renowned museums such as the Silkeborg Museum, where the Tollen man now resides. Danish archaeologist Niels Linderup has come to Silkeborg from Copenhagen to undertake some state-of-the-art scientific analysis of the 2,500-year-old bog body.
Tollen man really is one of the most spectacular finds of Danish antiquity. And I think Tollen man means a lot to me, but probably to a lot of people, because it really is so well preserved. You can actually see the expression, the eyelashes and the stubble, which allows us to really get a glimpse of the person, the actual person, 2,000 years across time.
It doesn't take a genius to deduct from the rope around the Tollen man's throat that this was the instrument of death. But what scientists don't know yet is whether or not he was hanged by the rope or it was used to drag him along the ground to break his neck. Dr. Linderup's new science may help to answer that. Very gingerly, the team of scientists removes the bulletproof glass casing that has protected the Tollen man for 50 years. All that remains intact of this body is the remarkably preserved head and his feet. The body you see on display is a cast of how it was when it was first found in 1950. But poor preservation techniques in the early days sadly resulted in the disintegration of the fragile torso. Under the watchful eye of the ever-careful curator Christian Fischer, the precious remains of the Tollen man are transported by police convoy to Aarhus Hospital a few miles away.